Before we get started, I'd like to introduce the board. We'll start with Christina.
Christina Stankowski.
Harry Kohler.
John Avent.
Anil Vera.
Kathy Slagle.
Secretary Emily Boyette.
Our first order of agenda is approval of the minutes from last month.
Mr. Chairman, I move to accept the minutes.
Do we hear a second?
I second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
And I abstain also. Motion carries. Our first order of business is BOA 18.05. Mr. Dice, will you explain to us the request, please?
I sure will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a request to approve a restaurant pursuant to the use appeal provisions in Article 5H3C in the Medical Overlay District. The location is 759 Nichols Avenue. The request tonight is to approve a restaurant use. This is the site of the Warehouse Bakery and also another location. The Warehouse Bakery was established about 2014 or 15. This is sort of a cleanup provision to ensure that it's all done accurately. The property is zoned M1, which does not allow restaurants, which is a bit unusual. Typically, the M1 district, which is an industrial district, allows a lot of different things in the city of Fairhope, but does not allow restaurants. However, the property does fall within the medical overlay district because of its proximity to the hospital. And in the medical overlay district, a restaurant is allowed on an appeal to the Board of Adjustments. And so they have come here tonight to do that. Staff has looked at this. We feel like it is appropriate. It serves many uses. It serves many uses from the hospital, which we feel like aids the hospital and the areas around it. And we think that the use is consistent. It's been operating. There's an addition to that, and we're just trying to bring that into conformance to make sure it's all done the way it should be. And so staff does recommend approval. The impacts are very limited, and we feel like the location is appropriate. And so therefore, we do recommend approval of it. Be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Wayne, I assume the owners of the private residence behind the property have no problems?
I have not heard from anyone. Not to say they won't be here tonight speaking, but I have not heard from anyone. Emily, have you heard from anyone?
I have not.
And this was noticed, like typically would be adjoined the property owners. Yes, sir.
Wayne, if we give approval or denial, does that go with the property forever?
It does. It runs with the land. Well, let me back up. The use approval is for a restaurant, for the property. And so so that use approval for a restaurant would go with the property forever. I mean, it runs with the property. Now, obviously, they'd have to come in. If a new use was to be constructed here, they have to meet all our requirements for restaurants, the parking and the setbacks and those kind of things. So so the uses, it would be allowed. They still have to meet all the requirements. The Warehouse Bakery and the new facility met all our requirements. We have checked that. They met all our requirements for that. So they are consistent with the zoning ordinance in that aspect. But to answer your question, yes, the use would go in perpetuity and would be allowed there.
Thank you.
You know, and really the M1 district, a restaurant use is sort of minor in the M1. M1 has a lot more intense uses than restaurants, and the area around it, except for the property to the very rear of the property, it's all M1, and so this use is probably a lot less intense than what you would expect. As you know, across the street, there are a lot of the mini warehouses and so forth. There was some discussion, or still some ongoing discussion about across the street being a sort of a warehouse district where you'd have different artisans and those kind of things there. That's still in the discussion stages. So this area has sort of transformed into an area where it's more entertainment related, I think, is where we're going in restaurant type uses. And so with that, we do recommend approval.
Thank you. We'd like to see if the applicant would like to make a presentation.
Not really.
No. Okay. If you'll come up and state your name for us, please.
Since we've been operating
Yeah.
for a while now,
If you'll,
appreciate
Terry, if you'll
this.
state your name for the record.
I'm Terry Carlton.
Okay.
Will Carlton, we're the owners of the property. It is my understanding with the medical overlay district and in the information that everyone received and that is in the provision or the, whatever the document is that says what you can have there, that you can have any of those things that are listed for the medical overlay district in that district. So in saying that, we're a restaurant now. Should we or our heirs sell it, would it be able to do any of those things? I mean, that, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't want to limit
Sure.
that.
Yeah, and with this piece of property, since you are in the M1 district, all the uses that are allowed in M1 are still allowed here. In addition to that, with the medical overlay, all the uses that are allowed in the medical overlay are also still allowed. So you kind of get, so when someone comes, if this site would be sold or passed on to another person, when they came in to talk to us about what can I do here, we would first of all bring the M1 uses up and say, here's the ones that are allowed by right. Here are the ones that are allowed by appeal, and then also you're in the medical overlay, and so we'll also look at that, and all the uses that are allowed in the medical overlay would be in that table of uses that you're allowed to use there, and then also the ones that are on appeal would be in there as well. So we would just combine those two together, and that would make up what your entitlements are for the property. Did I answer your question?
Just want to put this on the record. I want it just clarified for us. So if we were to sell the property, we would be able, whoever bought the property could do any of the uses that are listed in the medical overlay area, because they're very specific.
That is correct.
And so we want, with this exception, to make sure that is included. They can do any of those things, whoever would buy this property, if we would even sell the property. That is a clarification that we'd like to make sure that we know.
Yes, and if you were to, someone were to buy it, any of the uses that are allowed by right, which are in the use table, or in the medical overlay, you'd be allowed to do.
Okay.
Now, the uses that are on appeal would still be on appeal. So, because when you have these, like tonight, we hear about a restaurant, because that use is on appeal. If there's another use that's not allowed by right, and they want, but it's allowed by appeal, that use would still have to become from the board to gain their approval of a particular use. I don't know what all the uses are on appeal, but the ones that are allowed by right without any appeal are allowed.
The ones that are allowed in the
That's right.
document. Okay,
That's right.
that was what I wanted to clarify. Not anything that is not on the list, but everything that is on the list.
That's right.
We can, and there's a lot, I mean, a crematorium, we're not doing that, but I'm just saying, there's a lot of different things that are allowed underneath that, so we just
You
want
got
to
a
make
barbecue
sure.
restaurant, don't you?
We got everything going on over there. No, okay, so I understand correctly then that anything listed in your provisions for the medical overlay, a restaurant, everything else would be allowed. Anything other than what's listed, the person that
No,
bought
that's
or
not
we
right.
would have to come back with another appeal or something else.
Right. Well, so make sure so we have the M1 district, and in the M1 we have a table of permitted uses, and when there's a little dot, it means that use is allowed by right, which means that use can be established as long as you meet the parking and setbacks. That use can be established. That's there. Then we go to the medical overlay, and we have some uses that are listed as well. Those uses that are allowed by right, you can establish by just coming in and meeting the requirements we have. If the use, there's other restrictions on that. If you have a use that's 10,000 square feet or more, you got to get site plan approval, but that use is allowed by right. And so that means if you meet the ordinance, then you can establish that use.
Okay, we don't have to come back.
No.
Okay.
Now, again, the reason why we're here tonight is because the use that you have is not allowed by right in the medical overlay, it's allowed on appeal. And so that same process, if there's other uses that you may want to establish here that aren't allowed by right, but are allowed on appeal in the medical overlay, you would still have to come back in front of this board.
If we
But
wanted-
the ones that are allowed by right, that are listed in the ordinance that says you can do these here,
in the medical overlay.
right, that would be allowed.
Okay.
Okay? That make sense?
Yes, because I
Okay.
know there's M1 medical overlay. We just
Right.
wanted to make sure the medical overlay uses would apply to this property for now and ever, whoever bought it, whoever owns it.
As long as the medical overlay district is there on the property, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
We'd like to close the applicant portion and open it to the public. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak for or against the proposal? Close the public portion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
included in your packet are two letters that were received as well.
Three.
Both of them are in support.
We got three, right?
No,
Is there three of them?
just
Yeah.
kidding, there's three.
Okay. I'll open it to the board's discussion.
Sounds clean to me.
I have a question. The restaurant there now takes up a small proportion of that lot, is that right?
There are actually two restaurants. It's all platted. We own both.
The one on the east side?
Yes, we own District Hall as well. It is all platted as one address.
Oh.
759, even 759 Nichols it's all one plat.
So there's two restaurants we're approving then, or just the use of a
The
restaurant?
use of a restaurant, and that would apply to both of these uses. I will add that they have met the parking requirements and those things that we have. The buildings have been refurbished. I believe they were.
Warehouse 3 years ago, District Hall just
Right.
opened.
Right.
March.
Right. But the use the use appeal tonight would apply to both of those and the uses that are there. Right.
How many feet away from the homes behind you are the restaurants now? How close are they?
Only point that out. I don't know. Well, we've got a.
The actual building, how close is it to the homes behind?
I purchased the lot behind the restaurant,
I see, yeah,
and that's a parking lot, and
Oh.
so it's a big buffer
Okay.
between the restaurant and the residents behind,
all right,
you know, a couple hundred feet.
yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve BOA 18.05.
I hear a second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
You going to call?
I'll do a
Roll call.
Ms. Stankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kohler?
Aye.
Mr. Avent?
Aye.
Mr. Vera?
Aye.
Ms. Slagle?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our second order of business is BOA 18.06 for 107 Kiefer.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so 107 Kiefer Avenue, and Mr. Chairman, a bit of a complicated one, so bear with me if I unfold all the details. And Emily, if we can move to the next slide. And so what you're seeing before you on the screens right here, subject property is located within the R2 zoning district. And the subject property is considerably smaller than a typical R2 size lot. An R2 size lot would be 10,500 square feet. This one is barely above half that size. And what you'll notice in the drawing on the left, the drawing on the far left, that depicts the building setback lines required for R2 zoning district. And so the second drawing from the left, which the aerial photograph, it projects the building setback lines on top of the existing property. So you can see there's an existing single-family residence on the site. Ultimately, the request that we're here to consider today is the drawing third from the left, and you'll see the proposed building setbacks for the property, and then you see those imposed upon the same aerial photograph. And so we'll move to the next slide, and I'll give a bit more narrative after we examine this slide right here. The architect of record who's working on drawings and a building permit for a renovation for that single-family home on that property, they kindly and helpfully superimposed the setbacks onto the existing home. It doesn't show up very well digitally, but he gave a legend, a color-coded legend, and the bluish area is the setback line. The green color shows the areas where it overlaps. And then on the west side, which would be plan left, you see the light brown area, which is the existing porch. So for perspective standpoint, the requested setback line, and they're asking for it as a front, but it's actually going to be, the staff is going to recommend a rear setback line variance because of the way the property is shaped. But the home is oriented plan left. So the front porch of the home is oriented plan left. It just so happens that's the rear of the lot. What is being requested is that setback line would basically be in line with the existing porch now, but because this is an existing nonconformity, all that can be done is to maintain the nonconformity. So that existing porch is basically no more than a deck with a trellis. If the intent was to tear it down and remodel it, rebuild it, that would have to be accomplished via a setback line variance. And also you see the overhanging areas in green. And if we can go to the next slide, Emily. And this is a rendering of the floor plan of the home. Now, I looked up, the existing floor plan of the home is about 1,300 square feet. By approving the setback variances requested herein, that would give them well over 2,000 square feet of buildable area to handle that. In their narrative that's included with your package, you'll note that they noted dimensions of about 20 inches and 41 inches, and I believe what the applicant was doing there was requesting the minimum deviation or the minimum variance to accomplish it. What we're going to recommend, which will be on page, forgive me if I turn to that page, the staff recommendation, which is page 8 of this item in your packet, we're going to recommend approval of setback line variances. A 24-foot rear setback line in lieu of a 35-foot rear setback line. Again, the home is oriented to the lot's rear. A 6-foot side street setback line in lieu of the 20-foot side street setback line on the west side of the property. And then an 8-foot side setback line in lieu of the 10-foot side setback line on the east side of the property. And I basically, what we've done as staff is rounded those to even numbers. It makes it easier to delineate in the field. It also gives them a bit of construction variance. And before we turn it over to the applicant, Chairman, this is a bit of a complicated one. I put a lot of supporting document in here. Before we turn it over to the applicant, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question.
Okay.
The garage, it's existing, isn't it?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. So I did put some background information out in here. There is an existing accessory structure, an existing garage. That is not a component of this application for request for setback variance. We've noted in the background, as background information in the recommendation, we've noted that some of the supporting drawings not in your packet indicate that might be proposed for an accessory dwelling. We've notified and advised in this document to the applicant that would be something they would need to bring to staff to consider separately. That's not currently allowable in an R2 zoning district. However, it's possible that may be that requirement may be modified. A request may go to the city council to modify that in the future.
Why would the garage be modified? I didn't.
And Mr. Avant and Mr. Chairman, there's some, for the sake of not having a voluminous application, there were some additional supporting documents that the applicant included in their package, and for the sake of not being able to scan them and be able to see it clearly, showed that accessory structure possibly becoming an accessory dwelling. And so accessory dwellings are not allowable in R1, R2, and the various R3 zoning districts. So we did note that in this application. There's not a request addressing that in here, but since it was shown on their supporting documents, we wanted to note that that's not a part of this recommendation.
So, right now, the existing structure is encroaching over the setbacks.
Yes, sir.
And what we're trying to do is clear up these encroachments to a proper setback that would fit within the existing structure, right?
Yes, sir, as well as the proposed renovations, allowing those proposed renovations to fit on the
So
site.
they extend outward?
Yes, sir, yes, sir,
Okay.
because
From
without
the-
that, they'd only be able and permitted to maintain the existing nonconformity without being able to make any alterations. And ultimately, and maybe I didn't state it as well, ultimately it comes down to the ability to use the property for its intent for residences, which is the foundation for basically the foundation for having variance requests.
Only reason I'm asking all this stuff, I like to go ahead and make sure everything is cleared up. Personally, I'm for the variance, but the garage portion, wouldn't that have to have some kind of,
Well, I believe the garage is existing, and that's not
Right.
part of the request tonight, but I think what Buford was saying is, in the event in the future that came up, that the accessory dwelling would have to be reviewed by the city to ensure compliance, because Buford's right, in the R2 district, accessory dwellings aren't allowed. There are some provisions in the ordinance now that allow them under certain conditions, and we want to make sure that those conditions are being met.
but if it was just a regular garage, it'd be allowed as accessory,
As accessory structure.
as long as it's 5 feet from the property line and 10 feet from a house.
That's correct.
And does this meet all that criteria? I'm not trying to make it difficult, but also I like the applicant to understand that coming in here and going through the pains of trying to clear up their property, I just want to make sure we'd have everything cleared up.
So what your
right up
question
front.
is the garage conforming now, or is it non-conforming
Is it
now?
non-conforming
That I
as
don't
it sits today?
So in terms of this application, we're dealing with the primary structure. That existing accessory structure can continue to exist as an existing nonconformity.
And, Mr. Chairman, because that wasn't noticed, I don't know if we could address that garage at all anyway, because the only thing we noticed was just the primary structure.
That's what I was hoping for, that we could
Yes,
address
sir.
it now and get it all
Yeah,
cleared
and
up.
I think because of the notice requirements, we were precluded, and that wasn't part of the application, so.
Exactly, and Chairman and members of the board, we as staff are contemplating some possible changes to the zoning ordinance where that might be possible, subject to Planning Commission and City Council approval to change the
Right.
requirements for an accessory dwelling. But currently, an accessory dwelling would not be permissible, but the existing nonconformity can remain existing nonconformity.
Yeah, the garage now, it exists, it's a legal nonconformity, it can exist as long as it can stand there. They can paint it, they can maintain it, those kind of things. I think our concern was if they, we wouldn't be able to allow them to go in and put a bedroom above it or convert it to a bedroom, that's what we're
Yeah,
trying to say.
I'm looking at, maybe I should be looking at it this way for a title, for we won't have any colored title on it. And there's another provision about garages in this type of shape that needs to be looked at, but that's all right. I'll pay attention to the application. I'm sorry getting off on the tangent.
Well, yes, sir,
I was
and
just
Chairman and
trying to
Mr.
help,
Avon,
not
this,
hurt.
and like I started, as I began, this is a bit of a complicated application, so we certainly understand, wanting to make certain that we understand all the details.
All right.
Ms. Slagle, did you have a question?
I have a question, too. Why is the lot frontage technically oriented toward the alleyway when the address is on Kiefer?
Yes, ma'am, and this is a question we address a lot at Planning and Zoning, is that building orientation and lot orientation are two entirely different subjects. This perfectly allowable for the home to face the direction that it faces, but the front of a lot is the narrowest dimension, the narrowest lot line contiguous to a right-of-way.
Okay.
And there is a right-of-way, what would be behind the property.
And that is defined by the ordinance, so the ordinance defines what front and side and so forth is.
And so, yes, sir, and so following on Wayne's point, that's why it's a correct and appropriate recommendation for staff to recommend a variance to the rear lot line to accomplish what is desired by the variance request before you.
Thank you. I'd like the applicant to make a presentation if he would desire, if you'll state your name for us.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Lebitard. I'm the architect of record for this particular project, and of course, I'm here to answer any questions that may come up. I know we was talking a little bit about the garage structure and maybe some questions about the garage structure. Right now, it is the garage, and what we would do eventually on the second floor of that garage, if allowable by the city, would be to put an office up there. What I'm showing between the existing garage now and the main structure is a covered breezeway, which is simply allows the owners to park their car in a garage and go from the garage to the home in the event of inclement weather, raining, various different things like that, they would not get wet. So it's attaching the garage to that. That's what we're showing there. So with that, as Mr. Buford was explaining about how the variances in the older lots had much larger variance size, setback sizes, and of course now when we're coming up with what we're looking at today, the new setbacks is kind of tight on it, and so we were asking for these variances on these particular setbacks based on what you're seeing, and that we kept it to the minimum that we could. So I'm here to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'd like the public to come up and make any pros or cons against it. We'll open and close the public meeting. Staff? I mean, not staff, but board? Is there any questions or comments?
Straightforward.
Hear a motion?
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, I would like to recommend approval of the setback line variances as set in our information, 24 feet rear setback, 6 foot on the west side, 8 foot on the east side.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor, we're going to do a roll call, please.
Ms. Stankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kohler?
Aye.
Mr. Avent?
Aye.
Mr. Vera?
Aye.
Ms. Slagle?
Aye.
Motion
Motion
carries
passed.
unanimously.
Thank you. The last order of business is BOA, get the number, 18.07.
And Mr. Chairman, thank you again. This application, the address for this application is 13 Via Maria. This occurs within the Trentino Plan Unit Development Subdivision. And the request, if we can go to the next slide, please, Ms. Emily. And you notice this affects Lot 13 inside Trentino. This lot has a unique feature in that in addition to built into the lot, in addition to the typical setbacks that appear within this PUD, there's also an additional 10-foot landscape easement. And so that 10-foot landscape easement borders upon common area number 4. The request of the applicant is to basically treat that as a zero lot, as a zero setback line on the east side. So what would happen is the proposed home that would go on this lot would build up to the landscape easement. So the request of staff, and I'll restate it from here, approval, the staff is recommending approval of the variance converting, which would essentially convert the 5-foot east side setback line to a zero setback line for the subject property. The landscape easement basically would serve as a de facto side setback for that lot and twice the size of the typical side setbacks for this lot. In addition to the application, one of the supporting documents that we received was a letter from the Property Owners Association from Trentino, basically concurring with the recommendation. Chairman and members of the board, it's not changing, this would not change the lot, would not change the lot size. And so when I, as a staff member, was evaluating this application, it essentially would be a replat, but it would be, since you're not affecting the lot size, not changing the lot, and you still have an effective side setback in place, then using a variance as a means of accomplishing what is requested here is acceptable and therefore recommended for approval by staff. And I'll be happy to answer questions before we turn it over to the applicant.
Why is there a landscape easement? What is that?
Mr. Chairman, I researched that Trentino. I will confess, not an overly exhaustive search. There are several features within this PUD where there are landscape easements. Most of them are much smaller than this particular one. I cannot give a better answer other than that is a typical feature of this PUD. What's interesting about this one, though, is that this particular one occurs on a lot of record on one of the residential lots and not as more of a common area. So it is, I don't want to try to profess on what the engineer's intent was at the time it was created. Considering the size of the common area immediately adjacent to it, I'm not sure if maybe at the time there was a use intended that perhaps we don't have data on at this time. But basically, the current or the contemporary use, as you see in your packet, did attain concurrence with the Property Owners Association. So what I would say there is that the current intent doesn't necessarily reflect the intent at the time it was created.
Mr. Chairman, I remember this.
Well, I have a question on that
far did it?
landscape easement also. It would seem to me, and I looked at the property, well, there's nothing been done about landscaping it, that east side, but I would have thought their intent was to separate that Lot 13 from the common area next to it with some kind of a landscaped buffer, but in fact, it has not been done.
Yes, ma'am, and that may very well be the case. Is that at the time it was at the time of the design, at the time it was developed, they possibly may have had a feature contemplated for that area, and for whatever reason, possibly to attain the lot size needed, to attain the various features they needed, they felt compelled to place it in an actual residential lot rather than as a component of the common area.
Right.
I went through the file because this approval was about 15 years ago. When this subdivision was approved, and there was not a lot of data. There was really no data that could really shed light on that, other than that was a desired feature of the time it was contemplated, of the time it was designed. And so apparently that need never materialized or never developed to the point that anything was planted there. No plantings were made there. No features were included there. It's an unused lot at this time.
Kind of strange to have a setback off an easement line.
Yes, sir. It is a bit of an odd feature how it's labeled right there. But at the same time, it allows the lot to continue to accomplish its need of having a setback for that and providing that buffer against the common area.
Thank you very much. Is the applicant would like to make a presentation?
Hello.
Hi. If you'll state your name for us.
My name is Ben Stewart. I'm speaking on behalf of the homeowners.
Okay.
I'm their builder. The landscape easement, in my opinion, is to keep the trees that were originally on the property not to be cut down. So it gives you a buffer between the common area and the house. So, but we went out and marked the trees that the HOA wanted to keep to make sure we didn't tear those down, so they would have some kind of a buffer between the two areas.
Okay.
Any questions or? Okay, thank you.
I'd like to open the meeting to the public portion. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak for or against? Close the public portion. Forward, any discussion?
We did have a letter of support from the homeowners association.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's fine to me.
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor with roll call, please?
Ms. Tankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kohler?
Aye.
Mr. Avent?
Aye.
Mr. Vera?
Aye.
Ms. Slagle?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Before we adjourn, is there any old or new business?
We will have a meeting next month.
Okay.
They're keeping y'all busy.
I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.